Complex perspectives on a complex problem. This is Philip Bronner, and for this assignment, we were asked to reflect on the materials included in our most recent module. In our own practice, wisdom, and professional experience and work, to share and learn about each other's perspectives on trauma-informed care. So with that, let's get to it. All right, I have some questions that we were assigned, and here's question number one. You ready? How have the materials in this module shaped or influenced your conceptualization of trauma? And discuss any new perspectives you've gained and points to further exploration.
Hmm. A few of these models, they just reshape my understanding of the trauma within context of treatment foster care. I now view trauma not simply as an individual event, but relational and systemic experience, and how it deeply affects how the youth that I work with connect, trust, and behave. Um, One of the authors, Hubbard's, it's not all about behaviors. They reinforce that many behaviors seen in foster youth, such as defiance, withdrawal, or testing limits, are adaptive responses to relational neglect and disrupted attachment. This has helped me recognize that behavior management alone that's just not enough. And healing, it requires relational safety and consistency. And then in the Quinn et al. Study, the one on Black girls in juvenile facilities, that talked about how strong family and peer support systems can buffer post-traumatic stress symptoms. And in foster care, it really just talks about foster care really talks about the importance of maintaining healthy connections with the biological family, especially when possible, being able to help the foster parents understand how the trauma responses and the communication are. And I just want to be able to continue to explore and um, how to access for relational neglect and how to better prepare the foster families to respond with empathy instead of punishment.
Okay, yeah, wonderful. All right, question two. Based on our current social climate, what is the role of an advanced social work practitioner in understanding and being able to effectively work with trauma-related issues? And be sure to include your views on issues such as historical trauma, racial trauma, marginalization, oppression, microaggressions, etc.
Um, in today's climate, I'd say that advanced practitioners must address the racial, historical, and the systemic trauma within the foster care system. Many youth experience marginalized and microaggressions that pretty much compound their trauma. And our role is to create culturally responsive, trauma informed spaces and to be able to advocate for the equitable policies. Again, this just goes back to educating the foster parents, challenging the institutional biases, and promoting healing environments that affirm the youth identity and safety.
Oh, fantastic. All right, last question. What is at least one concept or perspective that you can incorporate into your practice to help you support a person in client status struggling with trauma?
Something that I want to just incorporate more intentionally is future orientation as a pathway to healing. In the Quinn et al., they found that youth who developed a sense of future orientation had fewer symptoms of PTSD. So in treatment foster care, I've noticed that many of the youth feel stuck in survival mode and struggle to imagine stability or success. So helping them create like just small, achievable goals to help them increase their hope and motivation. So for example, it would be nice I might be able to guide a teen to identify some short-term goals around education, relationships, hobbies, and just help them reinforce their personal strengths. And just encourage foster parents to support all of these goals, to be able to help the youth see that trusted adults believe in their potential. I truly believe that this approach reframes trauma recovery and from fixing somebody's behavior to helping rebuild the hope and control and pretty much a future possibility. Um, so that's how I would incorporate that into my practice.
Hmm, awesome. Fantastic.
Thank you for letting me share my reflections on this module and how it connects to my experience as a in treatment foster care practice. I really appreciated how all these readings helped me rethink trauma as relational and systemic rather than just behavioral. Now I'd like to hear your thoughts and your perspectives on those same questions that I just answered. So I'm going to roll right in. That first question is, how have the materials in this module shaped or influenced your conceptualization of trauma?
Well, as an addictions counselor, I generally conceptualize trauma like through the lens of individual psychological and physiological impact. Um, uh, we use like the ACEs, the Adverse Childhood Experiences questionnaire a lot of times that often underpin like substance use disorder. So it's there. And my focus is typically on stabilization and repairing like individual damage. So with the materials, especially with Hartman on the American Indian historical trauma, it sort of helped me reorient my view towards the collective and intergenerational nature of trauma. Like they challenge us to understand these like collective wounds that require collective healing approaches. Like I like that a lot. Except like the difficulty is that in my practice, while I agree with the value of community, many of my clients are like seriously or profoundly isolated. Either they burn bridges or their families are actively unsupportive, they're deceased, or making the maintenance of sobriety that makes it like a constant struggle. This is where I think this perspective becomes a point of further exploration, especially for me or somebody like me. So we'd have to sort of redefine what it means to be the collective. So if the client lacks a biological or social family, my role like shifts to helping them build a therapeutic collective within the treatment milieu itself. So this would mean like leveraging peer support groups, creating a true sense of belonging and group therapy, and connecting them to recovery community organizations. The collective healing model isn't just about cultural groups; it's about repairing the ability to connect and trust after profound rupture. Dr. Judith Herman speaks to the consequences of like insecure attachment. So we have to sort of repair that and focus on structural healing. So like I'm gaining a new appreciation that if I can't heal the individual in isolation, I can focus on addressing the structural factors that perpetuate their trauma and isolation. Something I didn't think I would be involved in very much is, the more of the macro or meso type work. This involves integrating the concept of historical privilege by Borrell and advocating for systemic changes in housing, employment, and justice systems that contribute to their continued marginalizations. So I've spent an awful lot of time in my current practice doing that because I see that these are like huge barriers for a lot of my clients. So ultimately, I value the idea of collective healing, and I really wish it was possible for a lot of my clients to have community, but a lot of them don't. And I will continue to learn how to like harness or integrate this concept, even if it starts small, but by helping one isolated client build one trustworthy connection at a time, I'll do it.
I'll roll into my next question. Thanks for sharing that one. Based on our current social climate, what is the role of an advanced social work practitioner in understanding and being able to effectively work with trauma-related issues? So just be sure to include views on issues on historical trauma, racial trauma, marginalization, oppression, and microaggressions.
Okay. Oh, I think our role, especially in today's like polarized climate, is to maintain the integrity of care and human rights while refusing to deny that these systemic issues persist. Like in addiction counseling, we're on the front lines of marginalization. So, we have to deal with this all the time. And substance use is often a maladaptive, yet it's for them, it's an effective coping mechanism for the constant assault of like, racial trauma, oppression, and microaggressions. Hemmings and Evans talks about that. So I think as practitioners, we must be uh, like a systemic advocate. We must understand that the individual's trauma symptoms, like substance use, are often rooted in historical trauma and ongoing marginalization. It's not enough to treat the symptom. We have to advocate for policies that address the underlying social determinants of health and well-being. We got to move beyond like this just cultural competence to critical consciousness. We need to be confident enough to recognize how our own privilege or lack thereof shapes the therapeutic space. We need to also actively identify and treat race-based trauma, as emphasized by Hemmings and Evans. And we can take a page from Dr. Judith Herman's work. In her podcast, she talked about how linking trauma recovery to the pursuit of justice is important for our clients. Justice can mean acknowledging the harm of systemic bias in healthcare, housing, and the criminal justice system, all of which, contribute and fuel substance use. Our practice should not be complicit with a climate that promotes any ideology that denies the reality of systemic trauma.
Thank you for sharing that answer. The last question that I'll ask you is what is at least one concept or perspective that you can incorporate into your practice to help you support a person in client status struggling with trauma? If you use a client that you've worked with in the past to answer these questions, just be mindful of confidentiality and privacy.
Sure. All right. Well, I use like many evidence-based approaches from like narrative therapy to dialectical behavioral therapy, trauma-focused CBT. The one foundational concept I think that transcends any specific intervention is prioritizing safety and trust while embracing bottom-up engagement. Many of my clients, especially those with severe opioid use disorder, have been re-traumatized by the systems designed to help them. Like Dr. Herman discusses in the Social Work podcast, the consequences of forming like an insecure attachment are profound. So my commitment is to create a secure, stable attachment and therapeutic relationship. Safety and trust is very important. It's key. Many clients don't want to revisit like traumatic events in detail. So they may just state that they were like sexually assaulted and leave it at that. So my job is to respect this and not be re-traumatizing or coercive. Alessa and Khan like also talk about how psychodynamic interventions can be used to engage in trauma-informed practice by focusing on the relational context and the client's present experience of the past rather than solely on detailed memory retrieval or specifics of the trauma. Empowerment and collaboration are significant. So this is where like the bottom up approach comes in. Clients often feel powerless. So I must be like the one of empowerment and collaboration. So we're like partners, not expert and patient. So I focus on present day coping, grounding techniques, and building resilience through community based interventions, which Dr. Herman suggests can lead to more secure attachments. I'm helping them regulate their nervous system and regain a sense of agency before I delve into the narrative of trauma, if they choose to do so.
Thank you for answering that. I'm just going to give a closing reflection. So, in both addiction recovery and treatment foster care, we see how trauma just disrupts relationships and how healing begins when trust is restored. Whether it's a
Mhm.
client rebuilding after burned bridges or a youth learning that consistency and care are possible, connection is at the heart of recovery. I think this module just reminded us that trauma isn't just an event, it's relational. And as practitioners, our role is to create safety, advocate for trauma informed systems, and to pretty much help people believe in a hopeful future. And healing starts when somebody feels seen, supported, and understood.